What happens when Hollywood's most respected actor meets late-night television's most notorious interrogator? You won't believe what unfolds when Denzel Washington sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Instead, viewers witnessed one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history, culminating in a dramatic walkout that left the studio audience in stunned silence. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The Late Show started innocuously enough. Denzel Washington, promoting his latest directorial effort, walked onto the set with his characteristic confident stride, flashing that million-dollar smile that has captivated audiences for decades. The audience erupted in applause as he settled into the guest chair, seemingly ready for another typical late-night chat. But what transpired over the next 25 minutes would become the stuff of television legend. The trouble began almost immediately after the commercial break. Colbert, known for his sharp political commentary and increasingly confrontational interview style, had clearly done his homework. But this wasn't the respectful preparation of a seasoned host honoring a distinguished guest. This was an ambush in the making. "Denzel, welcome back to the show," Colbert began, his trademark smirk already playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know, I've been thinking about your career lately, and I have to ask about something that's been bothering me." Washington, ever the professional, maintained his composure. "Ask away, Stephen. I'm an open book." "Well, that's interesting you say that, because your recent comments about the media and Hollywood have been, let's say, thought-provoking." Colbert leaned forward, his tone shifting from welcoming to prosecutorial. "You've been pretty critical of what you call the manufactured narratives in entertainment journalism. Some might say you're being a bit hypocritical, considering you've benefited enormously from that same system." The studio audience, sensing the sudden shift in energy, grew noticeably quieter. Washington's smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage, but those who knew him well could see the steel beginning to show in his eyes. "I wouldn't call it hypocritical, Stephen. I'd call it honest. There's a difference between appreciating opportunities and staying silent when you see an industry losing its way." Washington's voice remained steady, but there was an edge creeping in. "I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've seen how the game is played, and I've seen what happens when people prioritize clicks and controversy over truth and substance." Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Washington's pushback. "But isn't that exactly what you're doing right now? I mean, here you are, on my show, promoting your movie. Aren't you participating in the very system you're criticizing? Using the platform when it benefits you, then condemning it when it doesn't align with your personal beliefs?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Washington shifted in his chair, his posture straightening as he processed what was happening. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an interrogation. "Stephen, with all due respect, I think you're mischaracterizing what I've said." Washington's voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet that anyone who had worked with him recognized as a warning sign. "I've never condemned the entire industry. What I've criticized is the tendency to sensationalize, to create controversy where none exists, to prioritize entertainment value over journalistic integrity." "Journalistic integrity?" Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "That's rich, coming from someone who's made millions playing make-believe for a living. Tell me, Denzel, when you're up there on screen pretending to be someone else, where exactly does your integrity factor into that equation?" The studio audience began to murmur uncomfortably. Even Colbert's most loyal fans could sense that their host had crossed a line. This wasn't clever banter or insightful commentary. This was a personal attack disguised as legitimate questioning. Washington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a man known for his controlled performances and measured public statements, the slight tell was equivalent to a volcanic eruption from anyone else. "You know what, Stephen? I think I see what's happening here." Washington's voice had taken on a new quality, not louder, but somehow more commanding. "You've decided that instead of having a conversation about my work, about the film I'm here to discuss, you'd rather turn this into some kind of gotcha moment for your audience. You want to create a spectacle. I'm just asking questions that I think viewers want answered. Colbert shot back, his smile becoming more forced with each exchange. You've positioned yourself as this moral authority in Hollywood, but you're still cashing those studio checks. You're still playing the game you claim to despise. I'm just wondering how you reconcile that contradiction. The tension in the studio had become palpable. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some beginning to look toward the exits. The camera operators were getting shots they'd never expected to capture, and in the control room, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. Washington stood up slightly, then settled back into his chair with deliberate control. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of 4 decades in an industry that had tried to break lesser men. Let me tell you something about reconciliation, Stephen. Every day, I reconcile being an artist with being a businessman. Every day, I reconcile wanting to tell meaningful stories with the reality of commercial filmmaking. But what I don't have to reconcile is being honest about what I see happening in this industry, even if that honesty makes some people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Colbert's voice rose slightly, his composure beginning to crack. Is that what you think this is about? Making me uncomfortable? Denzel, you've been taking shots at late-night television, at comedy, at the very format we're sitting in right now. And then you come on my show expecting what? Exactly? A free pass? A platform to promote your movie without any pushback? The accusation hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Washington's expression had gone from professional courtesy to something approaching genuine anger, though he maintained the kind of controlled fury that had made him one of the most compelling actors of his generation. I expect basic respect, Washington said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. The same respect I've shown every interviewer, every journalist, every talk show host I've sat across from in 40 years of doing this job. But apparently, that's too much to ask. The stage was set for something unprecedented. 2 titans of their respective crafts, locked in a battle of wills that neither seemed prepared to lose. And as the commercial break music began to swell, viewers could sense that what they had witnessed so far was only the beginning. During the commercial break, the atmosphere backstage was electric with tension. Producers huddled together, whispering frantically about damage control. Washington sat motionless in his chair, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the cameras, while Colbert paced behind his desk like a predator preparing for the kill. The audience, still buzzing with nervous energy, had no idea that the worst was yet to come. When the cameras rolled again, Colbert's demeanor had shifted. Gone was any pretense of jovial host welcoming a beloved guest. In its place was something colder, more calculated, the look of a man who had decided to burn bridges rather than build them. And we're back with Denzel Washington, Colbert announced to the cameras, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Before the break, we were discussing your recent criticisms of the entertainment industry, but I want to dig deeper into something specific you said last month at the AFI tribute. Washington's posture stiffened. He knew exactly what was coming, and viewers could see the recognition flash across his features like lightning before a storm. You made some pretty pointed comments about how certain segments of the media, and I'm paraphrasing here, manufacture outrage for profit while hiding behind the mask of social responsibility. That was quite a mouthful, Denzel. Almost sounds like you had someone specific in mind. The gauntlet wasn't just thrown now. It was hurled with surgical precision. Washington's hands, which had been resting calmly on the arms of his chair, slowly clenched into fists. Stephen, if you're asking me to name names, you're going to be disappointed. I speak in principles, not personalities. His voice had dropped to that dangerous register that co-stars and directors had learned to recognize as a red alert. But since you brought it up, let me be crystal clear about something. When entertainers masquerade as journalists, when comedy becomes a weapon instead of a mirror, when platforms are used to tear people down rather than build understanding, yes, I have a problem with that. The studio had gone dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Colbert's face had flushed slightly, and his trademark smirk had transformed into something uglier. Masquerade as journalists? Colbert's voice rose an octave. That's interesting. Coming from someone who's never spent a day in a newsroom, never broken a story, never had to meet a deadline under pressure. Tell me, Denzel, what exactly qualifies you to lecture the rest of us about journalistic integrity? Your Oscar? Your box office receipts? It was a direct hit, and everyone in the studio knew it. Washington's eyes flashed with something that transcended professional disagreement and entered the realm of genuine fury. What qualifies me, Washington said, each word measured and deliberate, is watching talented people, real journalists, real entertainers, real artists, get pushed aside by blowhards who think a clever quip is the same as actual insight. What qualifies me is seeing this industry I love turned into a circus where the loudest voice wins, regardless of whether they have anything worthwhile to say. The personal nature of the attack was unmistakable. Colbert's face had gone from flushed to pale, and his hands were now gripping the edge of his desk with visible tension. A circus? Colbert's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Well, if this is a circus, Denzel, then what does that make you? The dancing bear? The trained seal? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been performing for Hollywood's establishment for decades, telling them exactly what they want to hear, playing it safe, never taking real risks. The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Washington had been called many things in his career: demanding, perfectionist, intense, but never safe, never a sellout. The insult struck at the very core of his artistic identity. Safe? Washington's voice had gone quiet again, but now it carried an undercurrent of barely controlled rage. You want to talk about safe, Stephen? Let's talk about hiding behind a desk and taking cheap shots at people who actually put themselves on the line. Let's talk about building a career on sarcasm and cynicism, while contributing absolutely nothing of value to the conversation. The audience had gone from uncomfortable to genuinely distressed. Some were looking around for exits, others were recording on their phones, sensing they were witnessing television history, though not the kind anyone would want to be remembered for. Colbert stood up from his desk, a move that was both theatrical and genuinely threatening. Contributing nothing of value? I've been holding powerful people accountable for years, while you've been playing dress-up and collecting paychecks from the same studios you now claim to criticize. At least I'm honest about what I do. Honest? Washington laughed, but there was no humor in it. You hide behind comedy every time someone calls you out for being wrong. You attack people's character, their integrity, their life's work, and then claim it's all just entertainment when the consequences come home to roost. That's not honest, Stephen. That's cowardly. The word cowardly hit Colbert like a physical blow. His entire body tensed, and for a moment, it seemed like he might actually leave his position behind the desk. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point, with audience members beginning to whisper among themselves, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. Cowardly? Colbert's voice was now shaking with anger. I face criticism every single night. I put my opinions out there for millions of people to judge. What do you do, Denzel? You hide behind carefully crafted public relations campaigns and sanitized interviews. You've spent 40 years being Hollywood's good guy, their safe choice, their dependable product. Washington stood up from his chair, towering over the set with an authority that made everyone in the studio suddenly remember they were in the presence of one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. Product? His voice filled the studio without him raising it. Is that what you think I am? A product? Let me tell you something about being a product, Stephen. A product does what it's told. A product stays quiet when it sees injustice. A product doesn't call out people like you when they're tearing down everything this industry should stand for. The confrontation had reached its crescendo, but neither man was backing down. If anything, they seemed to be feeding off each other's fury, each insult leading to a more devastating response. The audience was now openly uncomfortable, some standing to leave, others frozen in fascination at the spectacle unfolding before them. But as Washington's words echoed through the studio, viewers could sense that they were about to witness something that would define both men's legacies in ways neither could have anticipated. Colbert's face had contorted into something unrecognizable, from the genial host millions of viewers knew. The mask had completely slipped, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. He stepped out from behind his desk, abandoning the last pretense of professional decorum. "You know what your real problem is, Denzel?" Colbert's voice was now trembling with barely contained rage. "You can't stand that the world has moved on from your kind of Hollywood royalty. You're a relic, a dinosaur clinging to some outdated notion of dignity and respect that died with the studio system." The insult was so deeply personal, so calculated to wound, that even the production crew visible in the background seemed to recoil. Washington's expression shifted from anger to something approaching disbelief. He had weathered decades of criticism, professional setbacks, and industry politics, but he had never been dismissed so thoroughly, so cruelly, in such a public forum. "A dinosaur?" Washington's voice had gone deadly quiet. He took a step closer to Colbert, and the host instinctively backed away. "Let me tell you about dinosaurs, Stephen. Dinosaurs built this industry. Dinosaurs created the foundation that allows people like you to make a living tearing things down instead of building them up." "Building them up?" Colbert laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "You mean protecting them? Covering for them? Looking the other way when convenient? That's what your generation did, Denzel. You built a system where image mattered more than truth, where maintaining the facade was more important than actual progress." The accusation was so broad, so devastating in its implications, that it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the entire studio. Washington stood perfectly still for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just been said. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone present understand they were witnessing the end of something. "You don't know what you're talking about." Each word was delivered with surgical precision. "You sit behind your desk every night making jokes about people's lives, their work, their failures, and you think that gives you insight into who they really are. You think cynicism is the same as wisdom. You think tearing people down is the same as holding them accountable." Colbert had backed himself against his desk, but his mouth kept running, as if he couldn't stop himself from making things worse. "At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not. At least, I don't wrap myself in false dignity while playing the same games as everyone else. You want to talk about facades? Your entire career has been one carefully constructed facade." "Enough!" The word came out of Washington like a thunderclap. "I've sat here and listened to you insult my work, my integrity, my entire life's dedication to this craft, and I've tried to respond with the respect that this format supposedly deserves. But you don't want respect. You don't want conversation. You want blood." The studio audience had gone beyond uncomfortable into something approaching fear. Some were openly filming with their phones now, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Others had begun quietly filing toward the exits, unable to watch the destruction of two careers happening in real time. Washington turned to face the cameras directly, bypassing Colbert entirely. "I came here tonight to talk about a film that I poured my heart and soul into. A story that matters to me, that I believe matters to audiences who still care about meaningful entertainment. Instead, I've been subjected to a character assassination disguised as an interview." Colbert, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, made one final desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. "Character assassination? Denzel, you came on my show. Nobody forced you to be here. If you can't handle a few tough questions about your public statements, then maybe you shouldn't make public statements." Washington turned back to Colbert with an expression that was somehow both pitying and contemptuous. "Tough questions? Stephen, you haven't asked me a single tough question tonight. You've made accusations, hurled insults, and tried to create controversy where none existed. That's not journalism. That's not even good television. That's just sad." The word sad hung in the air like a final judgment. Colbert's face went through a series of expressions: anger, confusion, something that might have been shame, before settling into defensive fury. "Sad? You know what's sad, Denzel? A 70-year-old man who can't accept that his time is over. Who can't adapt to a world where people don't automatically genuflect to movie stars just because they've been around forever." It was the final straw. Washington looked at Colbert for a long moment, then shook his head with something approaching genuine sadness. "You're right about one thing, Stephen. My time here is over." He began removing his microphone with deliberate, measured movements. "Not because I'm a dinosaur, or because I can't adapt, but because I refuse to participate in this kind of spectacle. I refuse to let my work, my reputation, and my integrity be used as fodder for your need to create viral moments." The silence in the studio was deafening. Even Colbert seemed to realize that he had pushed things beyond any point of recovery. Washington placed his microphone on the guest chair with ceremonial finality. "I've been in this business for 40 years, Washington said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone delivering a eulogy. "I've worked with legends. I've worked with newcomers. I've worked with journalists, comedians, talk show hosts, and everyone in between. I've never walked out of an interview in my entire career." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the studio. "But I've also never been treated with such blatant disrespect by someone who claims to represent the best of what this medium can offer." Washington looked directly at Colbert, who had gone pale. "You're not the worst interviewer I've ever encountered, Stephen. You're not even the rudest. But you might be the most disappointing." With that devastating assessment, Washington turned and began walking toward the exit. The cameras followed him, capturing every step of what would become one of the most replayed moments in talk show history. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, some still filming, others looking around as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Colbert, left standing alone on his set, seemed to struggle with what to do next. He looked toward his producers, toward the audience, toward the cameras, but found no guidance anywhere. For perhaps the first time in his career, Stephen Colbert was completely speechless. As Washington reached the edge of the set, he paused without turning around. "For what it's worth, Stephen, I hope you figure out the difference between being provocative and being destructive. This industry needs people who can ask tough questions. It doesn't need people who mistake cruelty for courage." And with those final words, Denzel Washington walked off the set of The Late Show, leaving behind a studio full of shocked onlookers, a host scrambling to salvage his reputation, and television history that would be dissected and debated for years to come. The man who had never walked out of anything in 4 decades of show business had finally found a line he wouldn't cross, even if it meant walking away from everything he had come there to accomplish. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Colbert's stunned expression and the eerie silence that had descended over what should have been a routine promotional appearance. Instead, viewers had witnessed the complete breakdown of professional courtesy, the destruction of mutual respect, and the dramatic exit of one of Hollywood's most dignified figures from a show that would never recover its reputation for civil discourse. It was television at its most raw, most unforgiving, and most unforgettable.